running. But what's happened is there's been an announcement from Adobe where those simulate-based sims that are based on Flash will stop working. And to some extent, that's already begun. And I can show you a little bit of what I mean by that here. So here, if you can see my screen, you can see Forio Simulate, and this is an example. And we're actually, today what we're going to do is, this is a little bit of foreshadowing because we're going to try to convert this simulation over to Epicenter. I want to take you through the process and kind of show you how that works. But if I click right now on the link here, and again, we're looking at Forio Simulate right now, not Forio Epicenter. If I click on this, what you'll see is this announcement. It says it appears that Flash is not installed in your system. And I'm actually just using Chrome, and Flash it currently is built into or is available within Chrome. But what it's doing is it's warning me because I've never visited this before. It's saying, do I need to install, I need to get Flash installed. So if I click on this, it'll kind of instantaneously install. You can see here, Forio wants to run Flash, and I'm going to allow that. And if I do that, then it opens this up and it'll start running for me. So I can see this simulation opening with Flash. So that's what's happening right now, which isn't great, right? So the problem is that your users for your simulate-based simulations, if they're built with Flash, which all the UI designer sims are, will have this issue. Now, if I go back to this page, if I sort of move away from this now and I go back to it a second time, it'll work just fine. It'll load. So it only is on the first time that happens. So that's sort of tolerable for the moment. But the downside for the long term is this, that in 2018, Flash will become more difficult to use. And what that means is roughly 6 months from now, instead of that happening the first time that you load a simulation that uses Flash, it'll happen every single time. So that means that you'll have to deal with that. Your users will have to deal with that every time they click on, they try to start a simulation, which is probably too annoying, right? That's already to the point where it makes sense to migrate away from it. Then in 2019, the browsers will have Flash disabled by default. And that's really the point where we think that it's going to be unusable anymore. I mean, you can do something to kind of edit your browser settings to allow Flash to still work for a bit longer. And so if you wanted to run a demo or something like that, that's still going to be possible. But it's really not going to be something that's going to be tolerable or usable by your users. And that's, roughly, I don't know, it's sometime between 13 and 18 months from now, something like that. And then in 2020, the year after that, Adobe has announced they'll completely discontinue Flash, and Flash will be removed from all browsers. It will no longer be accessible. So Forio's strategy with this, Simulate will continue to run because there are simulations that are built with Simulate that don't use any Flash. But Forio will continue to support these Flash-based simulations, which means simulations that are running through the UI builder in Simulate through the end of 2018. So basically a year from now. And then sometime in early 2019, we'll discontinue it. Probably what we'll do, we haven't completely decided on this, but probably what we'll do is we'll make an announcement in January of 2019 that we're going to discontinue, and then we'll shut it all down probably March or April of 2019, something like that. So what we have decided on, we'll definitely give everybody a 3-month notice before we shut everything down. But anyway, we're looking at a year's in advance and things like that for this. And this is a good time to start thinking about your migration plan. And of course, we have some ideas for you with that. And I thought a great way to explain that is a little bit of the history of our platform. So as some of you may know, Forio's been around now for 16 years. It'll be 18 or 17 years here coming up in 2018. And we kicked off with this product called Forio Broadcast, which was this online simulation platform. So our first generation of our simulation platform. And that worked well for a number of years, but we had some ideas around how to make it more sophisticated and more user-friendly. And of course, the technologies on the web have changed dramatically from 2001 and even from 2008, right? So, but in 2008, we introduced Simulate. And, in 2008, if you think back to that time, that's when Flash was kind of in its prime. And so that's when, when we introduced Simulate, that we used Flash for creating these interfaces. And, I think that worked pretty well. So there were some very nice interfaces that were done using Flash by some of you who are on this call today. And then 3 years ago, we introduced Forio Epicenter, which is our latest platform. And this has several advantages over the previous two generations of our platform. A big one is that it no longer uses Flash, right? So that's kind of the key point today in terms of this Flash transition that we're talking about. But it also has a number of other features that could be really beneficial. Not surprisingly, we've learned a lot over the years in terms of how our customers use our platform. And as you may know, we're also consumers of our platform ourselves, and we have our own sort of, we're able to, because we use it every day, we're also able to identify things that we think would be better. And so we've changed some things with Epicenter. It's definitely the best version of the platform that we've ever produced. And there's been and it's pretty mature now too, by the way. It's been out since 2014, so there's been a lot of sort of updates to the platform. It's working quite well, and it's been used in a lot of production for a lot of production or simulations and things. So let me explain a little bit more about Epicenter, and then I'm going to move on to what we're going to do today during the webinar is talk about sort of the interface technologies that are available in Epicenter, and we're actually going to go through the process of converting a simulation over to Epicenter, and we'll do it obviously fairly quickly if we're going to fit it into the hour that we have today. Okay, so Epicenter is like Simulate, this computational platform. It hosts server-side models. You can create interactive interfaces on those models, and then you can share them. You can share them over web and mobile too. And there's some features within Epicenter that make it easier to build interfaces that work on smartphones, for example, and tablets. Part of that is the fact that it doesn't use Flash, but there's also some things around something called responsive design, which makes the interface scalable. Epicenter is a broader platform than Simulate was. I mean, Simulate was really primarily targeted to people who are doing time-based simulations, primarily system dynamic simulations. And, we support, well, actually, let me go to the next slide to kind of show that. The Forio Simulate language supported kind of three things. We had this, we supported Vensim, which is a public or a commercial product from Ventana. We had Simlang support. And we also had some, and the reason that Excel is lighter here is we had some Excel support. It was limited to a particular type, but you could do some things with Excel, and some people were successful at this. I think what happened with a lot of folks is they might start with an Excel model, and then it would be translated into Simlang, and they were using Simlang from there. So I think most of the people on the call today are either using Simlang for their modeling language within Simulate, or they used a Vensim model. And so those are the versions that we're going to cover today. Epicenter supports a lot more languages than Simulate. So here you can see additional languages that are available. And this is one of the strengths of the new platform. It has this ability to use different modeling languages. So if you use system dynamics, as some of you do, you'll see Vensim on here supported. Stella Pro is supported. PowerSim is supported. And we're working right now on supporting Ventity. So I imagine that sometime in 2018, you'll see Ventity support, probably in time for the System Dynamics conference next summer. And we're also supporting other technical computing languages, which provides all kinds of additional features and capabilities that go on top of, that you can do with these kinds of models that go beyond simulation. They can do things like optimization or machine learning or artificial intelligence and so on. So the things you can do with that include Python, R, and Julia. Those are kind of the general purpose technical computing languages that can be run through Epicenter. And then we support other languages too, like Java, for example, Lua, and specialized tools, again, commercial tools like optimization tools like iLog, or actually that's Cplex from IBM, and Gurobi, as well as much deeper and fuller support for Excel. We basically support all functions now in Excel. Except for the only thing we don't really support is Visual Basic for applications. Everything else is really well supported with Excel in Epicenter. All right, so I think this may be a good place to kind of show some examples of some things that people have done with the platform. I want to kind of go initially where I show some finished versions of simulations done with Epicenter, and then go from there to building it out for you, but give you a little taste for things that can be done. And let's see here. And I'm going to start with something that's just done with the UI designer. So this is a simulation that was developed by Cadmus Group, and it's about drought management. And they have this sort of introductory screen here. You can see there's a little video in here that I can play. I think this was done. Yeah, it was done in YouTube. So I can run this out over here on the side. There's a dashboard that shows different results from the simulation. And so here you can see some results from a run of the simulation. There are reports available here to other detailed reports, and then there's a decisions page. So all of this you kind of get with the equivalent of what the UI builder or UI designer is in Epicenter. So this is the kind of interface that you can fairly easily build, and we'll again show you some of this today, and I can run this out and simulate it and see new results over time in here. So that's the idea. Okay, so that's one example of a fairly simple but nice looking interface. Like I said, there's some capabilities in here too, where these things can be resized. If I scale this down, it'll resize the simulation. Let me show this to you. It'll resize the simulation, so you can see here I have a drop down now. Like if this were on a smartphone, this would work on a smartphone. I could see the pages of this, inside the interface here, and it kind of stacks the charts instead of putting them side by side. So I don't need to identify what target interface screen size I'm going to have in advance. It'll automatically kind of reformat this if I want to run it with a tablet or a smartphone or on the desktop, as I am doing today. There's another group, another person really, an individual who is an economist. He's a Dutch economist who built a model using a spreadsheet. He used a Excel spreadsheet. He actually started in Simulate. So he built his original version of a macroeconomics model in Excel and built out a simple interface in Simulate. And earlier this year, he wanted to turn this into a product, and he also didn't want it running in Flash for obvious reasons. So he ended up converting this into an Epicenter simulation. He did a nice job with it. So this is something that an individual did for building out an interface. You can see what he's got here. He's got explanations of the game. He's got student videos that you can watch around it. There's a student guide, which is a PDF file, I believe. Yeah, here it is. Here's the student guide for the simulation. It's nicely written. There's some explanation of how to play the game. I can start a new game. And the idea here is that, I'm running a macroeconomics world, and I can do the base case where we have some economic growth and a little bit of volatility, but not a roller coaster. And then what I can do with this is, see next year's economic forecast. There's some writing about what's going on. I can change interest rates, tax rates, and so forth. I didn't really know this model very well, so I'm probably not going to do well in it. We'll see. Okay, so here's some results. Actually, I did pretty well. So you can see the real GDP growth, unemployment, so this well, and this one I guess I didn't do so well. And this continues on. There's other reports that are available in here that are kind of nice, tables and things like that we can copied out. He's also built in some like an overview of macroeconomics, where he kind of explains how monetary and fiscal policy work, and kind of basic macroeconomic theory here, as well as a glossary of terms and resources and things like that. So this was built, this is a bit more sophisticated than the previous one, but still, pretty reasonable, and has a login for it, as I was showing here. And what's neat about this too, what this fellow Tim Rogmans did with this, Professor Rogmans, is he's created this site where he's actually reselling this simulation. He has the macroeconomic simulation game. If you go to econland.com, you can see this. And it has a little video that it sort of explains why you would run this. It's nicely done. And some background on the simulation. And then there's a process here where you can purchase the simulation as an instructor, or if you want to use it for corporate use, you can do that as well, and so on. So, and there's other things that he's providing here too that kind of wrap around the simulation, like a quiz about macroeconomics. And I think he also has a support form. Anyway, so another example of a model that has been migrated from Simulate to Epicenter, and is in production, is being resold and things like that. I know he's been able to sell this to some universities and some other places since he's launched this about 6 months ago. So this is an example of a simulation that was originally built as a Vensim model, and it's been translated into Vietnamese, and it also exists in English. This one can be this is more of a scenario planning tool, and we can look at different regions of Vietnam in this case. So I can look at, say, Haiphong here, for example. I can either log in, where I can preserve previous runs that I might have done if I was logged in earlier, in another day or something like that. Or I can go in as a guest, and if I go in as a guest, what happens in this one is that it doesn't keep the runs that I did from previous rounds and things like that. It reinitializes the model for a particular region here. You can see sort of results from that, and then what I can do is go in and experiment with different policies. So if I go in here for a different scenario, and let's just make these higher. I don't know that, again, I don't know this model very well either, since I didn't build it. But this is like a broad prevention policy, for example. I can run this, and then I have this sort of set of runs where I can compare them to each other. I can make this bigger, kind of see the outcome. I can copy this to the clipboard and paste this into Excel if I want to, and I can look at details here for different pages here. I can see, kind of what's happening with different regions and things like that. And again, drill into it if I want to. So another example of a simulation that's done in Epicenter, in this case more around scenario planning. So the last one I'm going to show you today quickly is one that was done for Harvard Business School. They use this as a data analytics game. And I wanted to show this to you today because I think it's similar to some of the simulations that I've seen folks develop on their own with Simulate. So it has, but this is a sort of a more polished version. This is one that Harvard is reselling to other schools and things, and it has some charts in it. And the idea with this is that you have, you have this diagram that shows that will change over time based on assumptions that you make. But you also have this data explorer where I can look at, what's happening with different products and kind of identify different groups that are going, where I want to make decisions and things like that for different segments of the market, I guess. And then the idea is that I can make decisions in the game and experiment with what kind of product I'm going to offer. So there's some decisions here and here. I'm not going to do too much right now because I want to jump into actually showing, but I did want to show you sort of a different style of interface. And this one would, again, would kind of think of as more of a high production value interface with these things. And I think these examples that I've shown you today kind of illustrate the concept between different types of users for Epicenter, and really our previous versions of the platform as well. So, the two different audiences that we have for Epicenter are kind of represented initially by this person. So this is, for example, a professor or a faculty at a university who's maybe built a model of some type. Maybe this model is in Excel or Simlang or Vensim or something. And this person would like to get his model online and share with students, for example, or maybe share research with other researchers or something like that. And this person generally doesn't have experience building interfaces. So this person's often is a subject matter expert in the area of their PhD, obviously. It also maybe knows modeling, but isn't an expert in terms of how to lay out interfaces, or maybe doesn't know HTML and things like that. And Epicenter is designed to support this type of person. But in addition to supporting this kind of person who's working on his own and needs help kind of building the interface and things like that, we want Epicenter to support these teams too. And we have lots of folks who build what we think of as high production value interfaces that are resold, and they'll have maybe 5, 6, maybe more people who are collaborating to build an interface online. And they might consist of a UI designer who's coming up with a design that matches the brand for the company, for example, or a school. There's a modeler of some sort, or maybe scientific programmer, again, because we support Python and R and these other languages. There's a web developer who wants to work with web tools they're familiar with. And because this might be released to, in some cases, millions of people, but sometimes tens of thousands or thousands of people and things, you need to do QA on it so that you make sure that it works well in different environments. And, you want to make sure that the custom designed web pages that were done by the web developer will function nicely and with different browsers and things like that. And then you also have a project manager. So because you have a lot of people that are working on this. So my point is that we want to be able to support both these styles of users people who want to build simulations. So we want to support an individual, and that may be like some of you today, but there might be some of you too who are in the boat of, or in the situation where they are, you have a group of people and you want to sort of share responsibilities for developing simulations. Just one other thing I want to say about this person here is, one of the things that we've learned from Simulate is that it's hard to develop good interfaces, and people who are good at building models are rarely good at building interfaces. It's a completely different skill, which is why that UI builder piece is on there. And we've seen, with our previous version, interfaces, models that were really interesting and had lots to say and were interactive, but they weren't. The layout wouldn't match what kind of a typical UI design would look like. And just to give an example of something that I think has great insights in, it's a really good model and works. It's perfectly functional, but could benefit from a UI designer is this style of interface. And I don't want to pick on this interface because again, I think it works well, and it has some neat features in it and things. But there's just things in terms of alignment and color choice and things like that where what we've learned is that there's things that our own team at Forio, we have professional UI UX designers who work on developing interfaces, that if we could take their expertise and make it easier for individuals to build their own interfaces, then to use sort of that expertise, then we would end up with having better interfaces. So our goal is to help individuals like this person build better interfaces by providing more guidance in that. And that's one of the lessons learned with Epicenter and why we've taken a different approach for building interfaces in Epicenter. So here I'm showing you sort of the stack of interface technologies that work within Epicenter. And they start with this interface templates tool, which is a reimagining of the way that the UI designer tool worked in Simulate. And then you can drop down to lower levels like Flow.js, for example, which is HTML for editing interfaces. And it's actually pretty accessible. I'm like many of you who are on this call today. I'm someone who is a modeler by background. I'm not someone who's a designer or an HTML. I don't know much HTML or anything like that, but I've learned a little bit, and I actually like this layer the best. I think this is a really nice way because it gives me a lot of flexibility, and it's still fairly easy to use. But if you are a professional web designer, or if there's someone on your team who is, they can use either this Flow.js level layer or this Epicenter.js layer. And if you want to build a full, say, iOS app where you want it to run as a standard app in the Apple Store or an Android app or something like that, you can even do that with the platform using these aggregate APIs and base APIs that are available within the platform too. And as you go up the stack, what we see is that things get easier, and as you go down the stack, things become more flexible. So that's the basic trade-off with that. So that was my introduction, and what I want to do next is actually go through the process of putting these together here, and sort of actually, since we've talked about this, the name of this talk today is transitioning or migrating from Forio Simulate to Forio Epicenter. I want to show that in the context of actually doing it. And what I thought I'd use today is this example. This is a nice little example of a diffusion model that was done in Simulate. And it's a reasonable one to try to do in, say, 10 or 15 minutes or something like that for a conversion. So we've got adopters here, and adoption is some graphs that are coming out, a decisions area in here, and then there's this diagram. And we have a little label up here at the top, and so on. So and I think this links to a website somewhere or something like that. But this is the model that we're going to try to move today. So I'm inside of Simulate here, and I'm in my account. I've copied this model over. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to the model tab, if you're familiar with this, and then I can download the model. So this was a model that happened to be developed in Vensim, as you can see here. And again, it varies a little bit by type of model, but Epicenter is a superset of all the model types that existed in Simulate. So if you have a model in Simulate, you'll be able to migrate that model over in kind of a similar way for the different versions. So let me go ahead and download this model here. So I'm downloading the model. It's model.vmf. It's the one that I've downloaded. And that's, I guess, the initial starting point with this. I'm going to go in here now and go to Forio Epicenter. And you can get to that, by the way, if you go to forio.com/epicenter. So that's the URL for it. If you've never been there before, you can sign up for a free account. But of course, I have an account on this platform, so I'm going to go ahead and sign in and type in my password. And when you're in Epicenter, what you'll see is you'll have a section for personal projects, which are kind of your free projects. There are also team-based accounts that kind of address that larger team that I was mentioning earlier. And the team-based accounts also have a really important feature for some of you, which is you can put password protection on your simulation. So the personal accounts are free, and the team accounts we charge for. You can, and the team accounts can also have multiple people kind of collaborate to build simulations, although you don't need to do that. So let me start off by creating a new project. And what I want to do is create a version of this one, this vast diffusion model, right? So let me go back to the overview here. And I'm going to call this, I guess, vast diffusion model, just to keep the name the same. And what you can see here is it's created a URL for me like this. It says forio.com/app/mbean, which is my account name for my personal account. And then it puts this all in lowercase and put hyphens between it, turns it into something that can be used as a URL. One of the other features, by the way, that Epicenter has is that if you have access to hosting your own HTML, you can run your Epicenter model on your own website and still have it kind of hosted by Forio kind of under the hood. So that's kind of a nice feature of that. If you don't want to use this URL, that's something that's available for everybody. But I'm going to go ahead and make this publicly accessible instead of private. And again, if you had a for-pay account, you'd have a third option, which is authenticated, which means a password-protected account. So let me go ahead and create this. All right, so I have this account, and there's nothing in it right now, of course, right? I just created it for the first time. And what you can see here is there's a model folder that's empty right now, and there's an interface folder that would have the HTML files in it that is also empty. So my first step is to get this model inside of Epicenter. And the way I do that is I go to my folder here, and I have the model that I brought in. I'm going to go ahead and drag that in. And so this model now is uploaded to Epicenter. You see, I just dragged it over into the folder. There's other ways of getting it into. I could have just gone to upload file if I wanted to from the actions here, but it's easy just to drag it in. So I've got a model in here now, but I still don't have an interface. And unfortunately, we can't translate the Flash-based interface into Epicenter because of these sort of changes in the way that we want the platform to work and to make it sort of compatible with modern web browsers and smartphones and things like that. So we've added this interface builder tool, and this is what we're going to use today to kind of build this whole thing out. All right, so when I log into this, depending on the type of simulation that I've uploaded, it's going to ask me what kind of project I'm building. And it sort of recognizes, based on the type of model that you uploaded, what's feasible for this. And because I uploaded a Vensim model, it's recognizing, well, I could do a turn-by-turn based game if I wanted to do that, or I could do a run comparison style simulation. And I guess, I've kind of gone back and forth on this as I was kind of preparing for this webinar today. This one kind of it's really not either of these versions. It doesn't really compare things, but I think the intent by the author of this simulation was to do something where you sort of are able to compare runs. So let me kind of quickly show that to you. So what I can do here is I can change these decisions here. And then if I rerun it, what it'll do is it'll create new results in here for the run of the simulate. I guess I have to hit simulate. There we go. So there's the runs of the simulation that are coming out. And so I could do that multiple times and kind of iterate through decisions and things like that. But it's not kind of advancing for a few years and so I want to see all results all at one time, right? So what I'm going to do then is choose this run comparison to do that. And what happens is within Epicenter is we provide these templates for building out an interface that is going to be well structured and is going to work on smartphones and on tablets and on the desktop. And what I want to do is kind of create a menu that's similar to the menu that was in this simulation originally here. So I guess, why don't I start with putting in some of the project title stuff. I guess I'm going to do that initially here. Okay, so let me go to Global Settings. Then I'm going to go to Header and Footer Settings. And what I want to do is I want to give this project a title. And the project title is Bass Diffusion Model. So I'll just copy that over here. And I'd also, what I see here in the design is that there's this label here that says dynamic forecasting. And what I'd like to do is get that into my interface. So there's different ways I can do that. I can go in and look at the code and pull it out. I might have a copy of that logo somewhere if I built this myself. But what I'm going to do is, if I do on the Mac, if I do Command-Shift-4, it lets me kind of copy stuff over. So I'm just going to copy this little piece here. And then what that does is that saves it to my desktop. And if I go back here now, actually, let me just go to my desktop. Yeah, so here's this thing. I'm going to call this dynamic, I guess. Okay, so that's my that's this label here. And now what I can do is I can add a new image to Epicenter. I'm going to choose dynamic that I just created. And you can see there what it does is it loads it, and I can kind of resize this to make it fit. I'll hit OK. And I've got that set up. So I have Bass Diffusion Model. I can put a copyright notice in if I want to. I can also link to other pages if I want to put HTTPS, Forio.com. I say visit Forio. Or if I want to say, this copyright notice is for Michael Bean or whatever, project author Michael. So you get an idea for this. Now, if I go back to the pages, you can start to see what this looks like. So I've got this thing up here at the top. I've got Bass Diffusion Model. It's starting to look a bit like, at least structurally, similar to what we had before. But the next problem is the menu items are incorrect here. So here I have a dashboard. The original didn't have an introduction. I'm going to keep that in here just for the sake of, I might want to add a detailed introduction later on. So I can say, welcome to the Bass Diffusion Model. And but the dashboard I didn't really have in the original, so I want to get rid of that. And the way I'm going to do that is create some new pages that are based on the original design here. So what I have is adopters, adoption, and diagram. So those are the 3 pages that I want to add to my interface here. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a page called, and by the way, just slow down a little bit here. I'm clicking on Add Page over here on the left to create this. I click on that, and then what you see is a bunch of nicely designed pages, so designed by a professional UX UI designer that we can select from, and that we can use as starting points for creating a nice interface. And I don't have to follow these exactly, but it sort of gives me an idea for how I might design something like this. And for that first page, what I really want is this ability to compare runs of the simulation. And if I look at what was done here, I go back to adopters, this is kind of a single page with a single graph on it. So that's closest in terms of design to this one. And I'm going to call this one adopters, I guess. So that's going to be one page that I'm creating. And if I go back here, I'm going to create another page that's, I guess, the same thing again. If I look at this one for adoption, it's kind of a similar layout, but it has some graphs on the bottom here. I'm going to call this my adoption page, just to use the same name that I did before. So there it is. And then lastly, what I want to do is create this diagram that shows sort of the diffusion dynamics that are going on here, if you're familiar with the Bass Diffusion Model. So I want to create a page that looks like that, and that's probably closest to this text page. Probably this top one here that has a big graph in the, or a big image in the middle could work well for that. So I'll call this my diagram, I guess. Okay. So I've created these 3 pages in here. And what I want to do now is get those pages into my navigation section. And the way I do that is I go to Global Settings. I go to header, footer setting. Navigation settings, and change the layout. So right now I have dashboard, which is a page I no longer want. It's sort of, it's giving me a recommendation for a structure for building a sim of this style, but I can ignore that if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to keep my introduction page. I do want to have a decision page. I'm also going to use this Run Manager page because this is sort of an extra feature that's available in Simulate, or excuse me, in Epicenter that didn't exist in Simulate. But now what I want to do is add some additional navigation items. By the way, I could do this in different ways. I could do a drop-down menu if I want. But what I'm doing right now is instead it's just adding single navigation items to make it look as close as possible to the original. So I want to do adopters. Let me go ahead and put that in. And then that means I want to link to the page adopters. I want to add another navigation item here, which is, what was it called here? Adoption. So I want to link to the page adoption here. And I'll link here. And then I'll add another one, which is called, what was it? Diagram. Okay, so I'll put diagram here. And I'm going to link to the page diagram that I just created. And I want to kind of put them in the right order here. So adopters, I want to have appear after introduction, and adoption, I want to have appear after adopters. And that looks right to me. Well, actually, you know what? I'll put this one above the run manager. So now if I look at the page, it's getting closer, right? I've got introduction, adopters, adoption, decisions, diagram, run manager. If I wanted these to be drop downs, they could be, but I'm sort of happy with this basic setup for now. And now what I need to do is make the chart look similar to what I had before for adopters. So I'm going to click in and set up a chart. You can see I have different line or chart styles that are available. And again, looking at this one, for adopters, I have adopters and potential adopters as the two graphs that I want to show. So I'm going to click on line chart, and I'll call this, I guess, adopters. And then I have the data for my chart. And what I want to do is add a variable, and I'm going to select a variable here, and it has this model introspection like Simulate did as well, where I can look inside of it. And I want to look up adopters here. So that's one variable that I'd like to show. I want to add another variable, which is, I think it's potential adopters. Good, I found that. And I guess lastly, what I'd like to do is have a legend on there. Okay, so now I've got this set up with the legend and everything running. And so next thing I want to do is go to the adoption report. So let me go ahead and save this right now. So for this one, I want it to look similar to this as well, where I have these line items on it for adoption. And what I'm going to do is put in a line chart again. I'll call this adoption. And for I'm going to add a variable here, adoption from marketing, and adoption from word of mouth. Okay, so let's look at that. So we want to have total adoption here. Oh, they're all in line, actually. That's nice. Okay, then we want to have adoption from marketing. And then adoption from word of mouth. Okay, great. So those are my lines for this. And then I also want to turn on the legend here. There we go. So we can see the legend here for below. Okay, so I've got that set up. Next, what I want to do is set up decisions that are similar to the decisions that I had in the original design here. The decisions we have are marketing expenditure, marketing effectiveness, contact rate, and adoption probability. So let me go ahead and do that. And the way I'm going to do that here is click in decision type. And I have these different decision types that I can do: checkboxes, radio buttons, text input. So the one that was in here was a text input. Let me just go ahead and select that. And again, what I want to do is I want to label that or name that marketing expenditure. And the variable that I want to pull for that is total marketing expenditure. And I can format that if I want to, which I guess is in US dollars, I think. So I'll use that format. I can also change that if I don't like it. So if I want to format it differently, I can go, like this for formatting it. This will remove the pennies off of that there if I want to. Okay, so then I want to put another one in. And for fun, and for the marketing effectiveness, which I guess ranges from 1 to 10,000, I'm going to put this in as a slider because I think that might be a better way to do it. So let me just put that in, and that is marketing effectiveness. And I'll choose that variable here for my model. The number format for this, I guess I'll just use thousands, and I'll just have that start. What did they say was the range for it? It was 1 to 10,000. Okay, so the minimum is 1, the maximum is 10,000. And I'll make an increment of 1 here. Okay. And then one more decision, which is contact rate and adoption probability. Those are the last two. So let me do those. So there's contact rate. And we'll pull that up. And then, and that's good. And if I want to, I can put in another one here, which is going to be adoption probability. Oops. Okay, and that should be adoption probability. There it is. And let's see, that's point, yeah, that looks like a percentage, or it should be a percentage. So I'll format that as a percent. And there it is at 1.5%. Okay. Then next, what I want to do is tell it where to go. So when I run this, what I want it to do is go to the adoption report, because I think that's the most interesting one that I want to share here. Then I also want to add this diagram in, so you can see an area for the diagram. And notice here, there's suggestions for things that could be laid out, but I don't have to do any of these if I don't want to. What I'm going to do here is select the media, and I'm going to put an image in. And what I want to do is get that image from the interface in here. I'm going to use the same technique I did a moment ago, which is just to use a feature that's available on my Mac for copying images out. But again, I don't have to do it this way. So I've gone ahead and done that. And that should have saved it to my desktop. Let's see if that did it. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to call this my diagram, I guess. There it is. Go back to the interface here, and I'm going to add a new image, which will be diagram. Okay, there it is. And I'll size this out. There we go. Okay, there's my image for my diagram, and that's good. So I've got this whole thing done, I think. If I go back to it now, I can preview it and see what this looks like. It says, welcome to the BAS diffusion simulation. I can go to decisions here, look at my adoption report, and kind of see how things have run out over time. There it is. I have this sort of new feature, which is kind of nice, which is if I change an assumption in here, or maybe a couple assumptions, and run this, I would say this is a new run, or whatever I want to call it, new run 1, and simulate it. What it's going to do is, it's going to show me my baseline, but I also have this ability to flip to different versions of the run here. And this is something, because I chose this scenario comparison, it's going to allow me to do that. I also have a diagram that was available. And I also, because I've built it this way, I have this run manager where it's retaining or remembering the previous runs that I've done. So, hopefully going through this process, I gained some benefit in terms of new features and things like that. And this is one of the areas that it sort of shows that. So that shows one process for getting the model in. And there's more I can show too in terms of if you want to run using this with Excel as well in the future. But just as a last step, I want to show you what happened here in terms of how the interface builder created the interface. So again, as you would expect, unlike Simulate, what the interface builder is doing is generating HTML. And we worked hard, Forio, our colleagues here at Forio worked hard on producing a tool that created clean HTML that can then later be edited by you if you want to add additional features or to use other things that you find on the web. Maybe there's a fancy graph that you want to use, or there's other techniques and stuff. So if you want to drill down into working with a lower level of interface technology, you can do so by editing the HTML. So what you can see here, for example, we have these pages. And if I look at something like, say, decisions, this is what the HTML looks like. And here you can see how we created the slider for marketing effectiveness. And you can see the slider was marketing effectiveness was the variable, and that's connected by data-f-bind. And it had a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 10,000, and it would go in increments of 1. And this is sort of standard HTML to define an input. And if you say this, that makes it into a slider. So that's basically it. And if I put in a different variable name in here, if I change that, then that would change the variable. And my point is that this is more code-like, obviously, than the drag and drop tool, but still pretty accessible. So that's sort of a nice way to proceed with it. All right, so that's what I wanted to do in terms of kind of getting you started in learning a little bit about how the platform works. There's a lot more that can be done, obviously, and there are a lot more materials that are available within Epicenter for doing this kind of thing. There's a support forum that's very active that we have people posting on every day, and they ask questions and get responses and things like that. There's also an online reference guide, and then there's multiple webinars, including this webinar, which will be up probably later today, that will be accessible if you want to take a look at some of this material again and things. But to get to the documentation, what you can do, you can find sort of on any page within Epicenter, you click on the documentation link, and it's going to give you background on how to do things. If I look up, for example, Vensim here or one of these other languages, you can find out more about what you need to go through for uploading your model and details about how this all works and things like that. If you have questions about something specific where you're getting stuck on something, you can always post to the support forum. And the support forum has, as I said, sort of lots of different discussion and things like that. Setting an initial input value. Here's someone's asking a question, and here's a response. Well, you wrote this one, I guess, not too long ago, so that's good. And like I said, there's webinars that are available as well for kind of explaining some of the features and things. So we have about 10 minutes or so left in our webinar today, and just to wrap up for this, I'm going to answer any questions that any of you have regarding how Epicenter works, or other questions of things that I haven't been able to show today. So, Will, are there any questions from anyone?
Yes. Okay, so first of all, is it possible to branch to different web pages in the final UI based on decisions on the current page?
So yes, so it works similarly for branching to different pages in a similar. Well, the way that you do that in the tool is you can have the simulation recognize a variable in the model and just have it and tell it to go to a different page as a consequence of that. Now, in order to do that, you need to add a little bit of editing to the HTML in order to get that to function, but that's something that can be done. So you can have it go to different results based on what's there. You can also have it do things like show different text based on outcomes that occurred in the simulation, or even show different videos. We didn't really get into that today, but there's a way to both embed videos within your simulation and have them branch based on decisions that you're making. Any other questions, Will? Oh, maybe I didn't explain what the question was, but hopefully from context you got that. I'll try to say the question for future questions. Anything else, Will?
How can I have users log in with passwords?
Okay, so the question is, to say it correctly this time, how can I have users log in with passwords? And the way that you do that is you get a team account within Epicenter to make that work. So let me show you what a team account looks like. I guess earlier I showed you this HIV simulation, right? So you might remember this one from earlier, and when you might remember when I did this one that there was a login that was available for it, and it had this guest, but that was sort of an optional bit. If I wanted to log in, this is where I would do so with this. So let me show you a little bit of what that looks like. That sim, which I happen to be a member of, because I did some work on it, was done by this group called MSH. And so here you can see an MSH group for it. And they have two things in here. They have a test account, which is used for testing features for this HIV simulation. And this is the production account that was done. And then within this, what you can see is there's a group of members who kind of work on the simulation together. So these are the members of the group that collaborated. Some of those are modelers, some of them are a modeler. There's a web developer and so on that are in there. And then within this team account, there's this ability then to create groups for classes, for example, or customers or what have you. So, for example, this was done a while ago, so done about 2 years ago or so. But this was done for a brown bag, and you can see it has a creation date. It could have an expiration date for the account, but it is set to never in here already. And then within this, then what I can do is assign users to try it out. And if I wanted to add end users to this, I can do it here. And Epicenter has much more sophisticated end user sort of the ability to control end users than Simulate had. So there are simple things I can do, like if I wanted to add an end user, I could just type someone's name or an account name or something like that to add an end user, and it's going to give me some information about what I want them to be in terms of their name and password and so forth, and whether or not they're a facilitator. I can also upload multiple end users, and the way I do that is I download a template, and I can open up that template, and then what I can do with that template is put in name, username, and password, sort of in a sequence. I might say Michael, my username would be Michael maybe, and password is something. And then, I could have many people that are in here that are, well, not all of them named with the same username, but you get the idea, right? Like, so there could be Will and Samantha, and so forth, right? So each one of these people would have a different username and password, and then I can upload that here, by choosing that template that I just downloaded, and create the accounts. The third option that's available is I can allow end users to self-register, and this is something that did not exist in Simulate, but I can turn on self-registration, and I can let anyone on the internet self-register if I want them to and create an account, which is useful in some cases. Some customers like to do that, but I can also do something where I say, well, no, I'm only going to let certain users come in, and what you can do is create a whitelist of allowed email addresses so that users can create their own account, and then all you need to do is send them this registration URL, and that will allow them to sign up for creating their own account for your simulation or game or application. All right, that was any other questions, Will, from anyone else at this point?
Yes. Do I need to purchase a separate account for Epicenter? I already have a Simulate. If I have a Simulate account.
So there's a question about, do I need to purchase a separate account for Epicenter if I've purchased a Simulate account? And the answer is no. Like, you can retain both accounts. So the way I can show you a little bit about how pricing works with this. If I go to Forio.com, just go to our main website here, and you click on products over here on the left, what you'll see is, Epicenter is one of the options of the Forio products. It's at the top there. And I click on Epicenter, and then I can see pricing here. So this gives a little bit of pricing information. And as I said, the personal accounts are free. The professional accounts we charge for on an annual basis, and the professional accounts can also be applied. The number of authenticated, meaning password protected accounts, can be applied to Simulate as well. So for example, if I had this account, which is a medium account, I have 5 total authenticated accounts, and I could have some of those be Simulate accounts and some of those be Epicenter accounts if I want them to be, if I want to use it that way. But keep in mind too that many of those of you who are on this call, many of you have Simulate accounts that are free because they were you used them for creating the free option, and you can still do that on Epicenter. So if you have free accounts in Simulate, you want to kind of do the same thing where they're sort of fully publicly available, you can do so by using the free accounts in Epicenter. And if you want to have a password protected account because you're going to resell it or something like that, or you only want to have certain people have access to it, you can use one of the team accounts. And if you have that already in Simulate, you can keep that if you want to, and then apply some of the accounts to Simulate and some of the accounts to Epicenter. Anything else, Will? That's it. Okay, he's giving me the thumbs up on that. So we'll leave it at that for today. And by all means, if you have other questions and things like that, feel free to reach out to us. I think on the first page here, I showed my email address. So let me pull that up again. And the other thing that you can do is, if you have questions about things, is to go to our support forum and ask questions about how to set up accounts and things like that if you have follow-on. So thank you very much, and have a nice winter break. Bye-bye, everyone.